Welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod, where every week we dive into a different practice, a different perspective on life, and you come along to try it with us. Join us on Substack at mindbodpod.com to watch this episode as a video podcast. And if you want to support our crazy adventures and get fun perks like our weekly after party videos, consider becoming a paid subscriber. And now, on to this week's adventure.
Joel Schwartz, welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod. I am your host, Jeff Warren, and with me is my good friend,
Tasha Schumann.
Dude, we are pumped to chat with you. So this is, okay, everybody listening, I'm going to try to not be in hero worship mode here.
Impossible.
But I'm going to totally fanboy out because Joel Schwartz has been, without knowing it, he's been a kind of guiding light for me around thinking about my own ADHD, thinking about neurodiversity, thinking about how to make practice and life more accessible and amenable to different kinds of nervous systems. And then the whole social justice angle around that. And Joel has spoken really eloquently about these things in many different podcasts. You've got little pieces you've written on your therapy website, which I've read. I mean, you got to write a book, dude. Maybe we should write one together. Anyway, this is Joel Schwartz. Welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod. We're happy to have you on.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for saying that. The most meaningful thing for me is finding out things like this, that somebody has heard the work that I have done, the often grueling work, the very tough work that has gotten me alienated in certain ways. Because it's so countercultural, to hear that it's really resonating and giving people a roadmap and making them feel heard. And that is so deeply meaningful for me to hear. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, amazing. Well, I'd love our audience to get to know you a little more. And maybe based on what you just said, like what has that grueling work been and where does it chafe against the culture, the norms, like
The establishment?
What lay it out for us a little bit.
Sure. So, the very basics, I'm a clinical psychologist out of the Central Coast of California, and my specialty is in neurodivergent conditions, specifically autism and ADHD, though I am a generalist as well. And, the story kind of goes, which I think a lot of other ADHDers might resonate with, is I was smart to a point where I could get by in school pretty darn well. Even in college, I was somehow able to get a group of people together to body double with, and I could cram at the last minute and, did pretty darn well. And then I got to grad school, and even though my clinical work was exemplary, I just could not keep up with the amount of busy work that was being piled on me, and I nearly failed out of grad school. Luckily, I was able to get together with the help of some people. I had to take a year off here and there. My dissertation was just a grueling process, but I was able to make it happen. And then, after that experience and sitting down and processing it, turned out that, I was having some difficulties in my personal life as well. And part of it was because I had married a autistic person, and the differences in our neurologies were kind of getting in the way. And as we were discovering these things about ourselves, and I should go back and say that I was formally diagnosed with ADHD, but nobody told me what the hell that meant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was just, if you can do well at school, then fine, you're okay. But nobody explained to me that, no, it's an emotional thing. It's a sensory thing. It's a body movement thing. It's a way you make meaning of life. So in doing some of this work, trying to figure myself out, my wife out, I came upon the neurodiversity paradigm and the work of Nick Walker specifically and some of her contemporaries. And I started to apply it to the therapy I was doing. And it was this drastic change with amazing results. And I got a lot of pushback from colleagues. I got kicked out of some groups for trying to advocate for this stuff. And ultimately, I started my own group, Neurodiversity-Affirmative Therapists, which is on pause at the moment. I came up with this idea of neurodiversity-affirming therapy. In retrospect, I think the better words would have been neurodivergent affirming therapy, but that's what I had at the time. I kind of took the verbiage from a other Facebook group that was called LGBTQ and trans affirming therapy or something along those lines. And over the next 5-6 years, it just became a thing. And now you see neurodiversity affirmative everywhere. And it's so gratifying to see that this movement has reached so far and wide, that people are doing their own things with it, that we've really created a paradigm shift in the field that I hope continues.
So let's unpack a little more about the nature of that paradigm shift, like kind of maybe framing it against the bad old days of how people thought about these things and contrasting to how you do things in your office. So yeah, maybe set us up there in terms of the before and after and what things look like in your practice.
Well, I think it borrows a lot from other areas of social justice, where it's not necessarily the person who's the problem. It's the supports, the systemic stuff, the familial stuff around them, which creates so much of the pain that they experience. And this isn't to say that there are aspects of being neurodivergent which are going to be disabling across contexts. I think oftentimes, there's a criticism of neurodiversity ideas that say, oh, well, I'm still, disabled. I'm still going to have troubles. Well, yes, there's still going to be troubles in our lives if there's disability, but it is compounded by all of these systemic things. And so, one of the ways that we've changed things is, it used to be, okay, if you're neurodivergent, we need to teach you how to not be neurodivergent. And instead we say, no, what we need to do instead is have you get in touch with your neurodivergence, express your neurodivergence, live authentically with your neurodivergence. And it's kind of on society around us, our families, to learn about us a little bit. It's not, all or nothing. I think there has to be a meeting in the middle in a way. And it does behoove neurodivergent people to learn a little bit about how neuronormative people might work. But previously, all the work was on the neurodivergent people to have to conform. And so you can see that, a lot of this kind of philosophy would also come from kind of multicultural studies as well, where there's ideas of privilege, where the majority has a privilege to not have to learn the way that a minority culture might work or what's normative to them. And so we're kind of taking these other social justice philosophies and applying it to people whose brain works differently, and saying, we're all in this together and we should all be trying to understand each other instead of trying to force each other to be who we're not.
Love that. I mean, and there's also I guess one of the great inspirations too is from disability studies and the justice piece around there. And maybe you could say something like, because that's really where you really see a stark contrast between, there may be an impairment that someone has, but the disability is something that is determined by how the society responds to that person. And if there are wheelchairs, is a person disabled if they're able to enter in and out of all the buildings because there's wheelchair access? Well, clearly not. So maybe you could use that, unpack that a little bit.
Well, I think you did a pretty good job. The only thing that I might add is impairments like that, I think regardless of how much societal support there is, it's still going to be more difficult. It's going to require more energy to exist in the world. There are extra steps that you have to take to kind of do everything, even if there's a lot of supports around you. But then the answer isn't to, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and just do it. It's, oh, I recognize that things are more difficult for you, so I'm going to give you grace. I'm not going to, fire you because you're 10 minutes late and that you have less energy today to do things that somebody who doesn't have a disability or an impairment,
I always kind of my own neurodivergence is like undiagnosed, but the last couple of years, because Jeff and I love to sit around and talk about this, we're like, oh, I am totally a spectrumy bitch. Like, I'm sure if I did some kind of test, they would be like, you're, mildly autistic or something. But a huge part of the way why it's been not, an impediment to me in my life is because I've been self-employed and an artist, right? And so I've been able to, like, without even realizing, for like, a 20-year career, shape my world in such a way that the things that would irk me don't irk me because I don't encounter them. And when I do, I can just make it not part of my career, or,
That's right.
and
That's
then,
right.
right. And so to me, I always kind of liken it to code switching, because I'm also half black, half white. And so as a person of color, like in America, especially, I don't know, maybe it's different in America. I always feel like it's a little bit more pronounced in America, but
Mhm.
kind of across the board, there's like a way that you talk really naturally. And then there's the way that you talk, in formal situations or around white folks or whatever, and it's
Mhm.
like you learn the language, and as you get so good at it, it's not hard. But if you are really introspective, it's just this layer of energy that's constantly being
Exactly.
expended, right? And so you're just tired all the time. You don't know why, and no one can tell you why
Right.
until you
Right.
turn inward and you're kind of like, wait, and so for me, my experience is like I'm very hypersensitive to stimulation, like light and noise and whatever. And just anecdotally, like the other day was a perfect example of this. I was in the kitchen cooking. There's like all this stuff going on. There's like, the water is boiling and my partner's talking to me and there's sounds coming from the living room and the fan is running. And I was touching the lid of the pot to see if it was hot or not, if I could pick it up. And I was touching it and I was like, it's too loud in here for me to know if it's too hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it was just
Right.
like, I was like, I don't know. I can't, like, literally temperature doesn't mean anything, and so the last couple of years have been this like unfolding of like just paying attention to things like that and mentioning it's like, it sounds so easy, but revolutionary to just be like, I can't actually in this situation give you an answer because I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
in itself is like so liberating. Just this experience of like learning to notice first and
Yeah.
then learning to advocate. Right.
Yeah.
And kind of in concert with what you guys are with the podcast is a lot of this is about knowing your own body. And I think there's a universal experience of being neurodivergent where the word that we use is masking. And the difference between masking and something like code switching, and the way I'm going to say it makes it seem much more like differentiated than I think it really is that code switching is kind of a conscious adaptation that a lot of BIPOC folks have to engage in order to survive in a predominantly white society, Western white society. Whereas masking is oftentimes unconscious, a dissociative process that comes from a lot of little traumas throughout, one's life, which isn't to say that code switching doesn't come from, the traumas as well. So I don't want to put too much of a differentiation there. But when we talk about masking, especially how masking can kind of separate you from your body, I think there often is this kind of dissociative traumatic process which has caused it to happen.
Yeah.
And it's part of a larger, the suffering from that really radiates out. Like, just to think about my own example, I've had ADHD my whole life, and the bipolar, that sort of kicked in a little later. And all I know is I spent a lot of time feeling like on the outside looking in and spending enormous amount of energy trying to strategize about how to fit in other kind of contexts would seem that other people were just having no problem whatsoever. And because I was spending all that energy, I would burn out more quickly.
Yeah.
I would be more sensitive and reactive. I'd have to like bail on plans, or I'd have to like pull out of this, and it would have these consequences on relationships or on work. And it was like everything became this battle. And you're tired all the time. But then when you're not tired, I was just wild and out of control, trying to regulate using drugs and alcohol and like extreme sports. And for me, it led to a lot of messiness in my life and a lot of suffering. And I'd read a lot of books on ADHD, but when I first started listening to you, some of the ways you spoke about ADHD, I've heard a lot about the strength-based approach of ADHD, but there was somewhere in the way you put it that really made it feel more empowering for me personally. And it let me notice some of the ways, even myself with my meditation practice, aspects of my ADHD that I actually hadn't seen, that I hadn't, like, for example, the stuff around rejection sensitivity or the stuff around time blindness. So maybe for our listeners, because you did this in something I listened to, whatever, you kind of talked through a little bit of the experience, your inner experience of being ADHD, and the kind of collection of traits that I know ADHD is quite diverse, but that you notice in ADHD folks, and that as just a way to help people listening maybe find their way in, and how you would describe it too. I was kind of curious.
Ooh, such a big question. How
question.
many hours do we got? Um,
Higher experience as a person.
exactly. And I guess to summarize, the traits of ADHD that we often see highlighted in media and, the diagnostic manual are really the traits are more overt and inconvenient for others. It's the things that make us stand out as odd in the classroom. But there's so much internally neurologically that's going on, which isn't immediately obvious, that isn't even part of the diagnostic criteria and often is. A big primacy on emotional regulation, difficulties, being so in the moment with your emotions that you can't think in the future. You can't see the past, which ties back into this idea of time blindness. Blind not only to time going by, but how you exist in time.
Yes.
So, one of the things that I often have to do is if, I'm feeling very strongly about something that, my wife did, or, I have this thing in my head, well, it's always been like this. And I've learned now that I actually have to say, I'm feeling this, like it's always thing. This narrative is in my head. You are a really good historian. I am not. Walk me through this.
Oh my God. Can I bring my partner over here? Can you teach him how to do
My partner would want me to come in and learn how to do
It's
this.
so funny. All three of us are in the exact same relationship dynamic. Like one person
Yeah.
on the autism spectrum and the other person ADHD.
Yeah.
Oh, we could do a really fun hour on just the trope of the ADHD and the autistic relationship and how that shows up in all sorts of media, from C3PO, R2D2 to
That is so true.
to Harley Quinn and what's the woman with
Joker,
no, Poison Ivy.
Oh,
In
right.
the new animated series, like Poison Ivy is totally the autistic character. Harley Quinn is totally the
Oh, you're
the
so
ADHD
right. This is
character.
such a trope. The one who's like
Whoa.
wild and shooting off
Pinky in the
everywhere, and the other
brain.
one who's like very.
Do you remember Pinky and the Brain?
Yeah.
That is.
I have not enough.
What are we going to do today, Brain?
Can we please
Same
do
thing
that
we do
hour?
every day.
Same thing we do every day, Pinky. Trying to
Take over the world. That's literally in our relationship. We call ourselves Pinky in the Brain because Blaze is tall and skinny and ADHD, and I'm short and nerdy and on the spectrum, and I'm always like,
yeah. There's this whole like essay and like talking around how Pinky is really the genius and stopping Brain from taking over, but that's
yes.
ADHD.
Oh, whoa, we just blew apart pop culture right here.
We
so
did.
good.
Refocusing on what we're
ADHD
talking about. So yeah, that's kind of like the emotional dysregulation, the time blindness. All these things are really important to being
Sensitivity.
ADHD. Yeah, rejection sensitivity is a big one, but also getting positive feedback can be euphoric as well. So, one of the best things you can do for an ADHD person is give them consistent feedback about what they're doing in a positive way instead of criticizing when they do it wrong.
Which I interpreted as needy in myself without knowing it until I realized, oh, that's just part of. I just need the ping, ping, ping because otherwise I'm lost.
Right.
And I've been lost. I've gone on these wild years-long tangents of being lost in ideas, and that where I just couldn't find my way out because I had nothing to ping against.
Exactly. And it's a consequence of we get these floods of dopamine. So we feel things very strongly, but then it gets kind of resucked up really quickly, whereas it tends to stay longer in neurotypical brains. So, the result of it is that the effects of rewards really wear off quickly. And we can actually see this in studies where they look at kind of the neurological reactivity to rewards, and you see that it actually fades, which is also unfortunately why ADHD folks are just hardwired towards addictions as well, because we habituate to it so easily, and the feeling of reward that we get from the substance is so strong that it's just hardwired for addiction.
And the constant need of restless novelty too. I mean, it's the reason I moved like 50 times and lived in all these different cities and had all these different relationships and different jobs. And
I'm curious what the literature says about people on the autism spectrum, because I feel like for me, it like the hyper focus is my dopamine. I just like leave me for days on end to just learn about this thing that I just picked up yesterday and will be an expert about by next month. And I can feed myself on that reward system almost endlessly, and I have to stop myself so that I interact, with my partner and my friends and feed my cats and stuff like that. What is the research and the literature say about that?
So I'm not sure what the neurological explanation for that would be. I think it probably has to do with just the joy in deep diving information, being able to screen out the rest of the world by connecting so deeply to something. There's a friend of mine, Megan Neff, who's just a brilliant autistic psychologist, said in one of her podcasts, being autistic for me, and I'm paraphrasing, means having a mind that constantly wants to connect, but a body that constantly wants to disconnect.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, fair.
And so I think the hyper focus, the deep dive into a subject kind of gives this deep sense of connection and bringing things together, learning, but it doesn't necessarily involve other people or rest of the world or the onslaught of sensory information that could be so off-putting and dysregulating.
That's so on
interesting.
point. Yeah.
And of course, there is a hyper focus element to a lot of ADHD as well.
Yes.
And I've noticed for me with the hyper focus with the ADHD is that I think there's a flavor of that that's kind of like almost fear. I'm like holding on to it desperately because I finally know where to put my attention. Do you know what I
Ah,
mean?
yeah.
So let's chat a bit about neurodiversity affirming therapy. So when you have someone typically come into your office and they're struggling, what do you do to make them feel comfortable? How do you begin to approach their situation, knowing that, I mean, one of the big things I learned from you is that often people will say, oh, this person's depressed or this person's anxious, but really those are secondary things that are coming up because of this core neurodivergent nature that is not
Yeah.
being accepted in some way. So can you say a
Yeah.
little bit about how you work with people?
Well, the first thing that we would start with is managing the sensory environment because that is something so important. And, that might be questions like, is it bright in here for you? How does the light affect you? How does the smells affect you? I have these little containers of kind of homemade Play-Doh with essential oils. The essential oils aren't out because that could be too overwhelming for people. Personally, lavender is the bane of my existence, and everybody loves it. Um, but so it's something in a can that they can kind of smell themselves as a regulatory, tactic. Is the air conditioner too loud? Do we want to go outside? Do you want to meet at a park? What feels best for your body? Because if you're fighting off a sensory onslaught, there's no way we can get into anything deeper.
Even just hearing you say, like, "Is it too bright in here for you? How are the sounds?" I'm like, "No one has ever asked me that." And just imagining somebody opening a conversation like that, my nervous system is like, "Oh, thanks. Oh my god." That's so yeah. It sounds so easy to do, and we don't really think of it, of, you know?
Absolutely. And then, once we kind of establish that and we, talk about what their, neurodivergent experience is, oftentimes there's this, a couple of common things happen. One is we often see a lot of kind of mourning what could have been had I known this, had I started paying attention to this. And also just kind of this mind blowing re-understanding of one's own life from a neurodivergent perspective. And then also there's this, kind of chronic shame of being different, pain at being misunderstood. And oftentimes that pushes into, trauma as well, betrayal trauma, having misread things, having been victimized as a result of it. Sometimes you're just victimized by somebody and you've said, oh, it's because I'm neurodivergent that I missed this. No, it's just somebody has, hurt you and violated your boundaries. It doesn't matter what your neurotype is. Those are some of the things that kind of come up.
Do you find this kind of therapy, does it work online? Do you have an online practice, or do you like to practice in person? Does it
Yeah,
work
I do
better?
have a very strong online practice. Yeah. And it does work. Yeah. I think it could actually work better because the neuronormative expectations just aren't there when you're not with somebody. So they could fiddle with something off, you
Yeah.
know, I'm doing a ton of fiddling and things that you can't see right now. We don't have to look at each other's eyes. We can look away and we can,
And just being in a space that you're already comfortable in,
Exactly.
or you can do it in your
Exactly.
pajamas if you need to.
Yeah.
My ADHD is exploding in my brain because I have about 10,000 directions I want to go. But if I were to think about how healing has happened for me as an ADHDer, thank you, by the way, for that identity first affirming language. You're one of the people who first kind of allowed me to embrace that. But when I think about what it was, I started out as a mess. I got into meditation. I, like many ADHD people who were introduced to meditation, found it very hard to get concentrated, and I had judgments around that. But I eventually, through meditation practice, began to understand that meditation was not only about learning to employ your attention more intelligently, which I want to chat about with you, but was really the essence of it was about noticing who and how you are and learning to accept that. And
Yes.
in doing that, that has created a lot of healing, like realizing I don't need to be, you can't know that you're allowed to be how you are until you notice how you are.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yes.
you need
Yes.
to be some other way.
Yes.
And so
The more you like sensitize yourself to that, the more it becomes impossible to ask the world of anything else. You're like, this is just so clearly how I am. Like,
exactly.
this is how it's
And
gonna
so
be.
then that's the second part is the communicating that. So you start to see how you are, and then you can start to communicate and say, hey, look, no offense, like you're going to think I don't care because I've had to ask your name like 3 times now or 10 times now, and I'm married to you, and I should know your name. Whatever it is.
Her name is Sarah.
It's like, okay. Still, sometimes I misspell her last name, which she finds hilarious. But, I have a kind of dyslexia too, and so once I can communicate, I say, look, I have challenges with my short-term memory. I'm going to have to try this a few times. Oh, now people can kind of understand, and they're not going to be taking personal offense at how you are. And so there's this thing about getting more and more deeper into who you are, owning who you are, being able to communicate that, and just through that movement, so much less suffering. And because if you can communicate it, in a sense, you can communicate it to the structures around you. You can begin to create accommodations that work along the grain of this particular nervous system.
100%.
Yeah.
One of the theorists who very much influenced me, a psychoanalyst from England named Donald W. Winnicott.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Winnicott.
And Nick Walker also was very inspired by D.W. Winnicott's work. But Winnicott talks a lot about how our spontaneous movements are the bridge between our psychology and the rest of the world. And when you inhibit somebody's spontaneous movements, you are inhibiting their psychology.
Oh my God, I love this.
Yeah.
That's the embodiment, you mean?
Yes. He's essentially talking about embodiment before we even had those words. And the experience of being neurodivergent, I think, is having your way of being constantly being policed by others.
Yeah.
Your parents, don't do that. Your teacher, sit still. And over time, your body movements become a thing of shame. And so your psychology becomes a thing of shame. And getting in touch with what your body needs and embodying that, what Nick Walker calls engaging in neuroqueering, which is a great word.
Absolutely fantastic.
That is how you rediscover who you are. That is how you shed the shame, is through this bodily knowledge and daring to do it, even if there are consequences.
So what are some of the things you've seen as both yourself and with your clients as they've gotten more empowered to be able to express that natural, spontaneous movement of them?
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
Re-embracing joy, re-embracing just engaging with the world in the way that feels good for you. So one of my favorite stories to tell about the way that this might work is the first time that I went to Yosemite, which is a incredibly beautiful national park in California, carved out by a glacier, thousands of years ago, probably hundreds of thousands of years ago. Just waterfalls and rock formations and forests, and it's absolutely beautiful. One of the most beautiful places on earth. I went with my wife, and she immediately comes alive in this environment. She's looking at the light through the trees and taking little pictures and touching the trees and feeling it. And And I was feeling so bad because I just couldn't experience it. And then we got on our bikes and I
Mhm.
started to bike around the floor. And when I added movement, suddenly it came alive.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
Suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, look at how amazing this is. Right. And I could see everything and I could feel everything. And suddenly I could join her. I had to move in that environment. I
Mm.
had to do a whole body movement in order to take it in. Just passively watching it didn't do it for me. So to get to that joy, I had to check into what did my body need? I needed movement.
I love that. When I first approached you about coming on the podcast and asked about practices, I kind of touched on how we regulate each other. And you were like, I'm less likely to do a meditation than to go into a mosh pit. Or so can you
Yeah.
say more about like the dynamic movement neat aspect of a practice of how that regulates us?
Well, from a neuroscience perspective, the cerebellum, which is kind of responsible for a lot of the way that our body moves, balance, that kind of stuff, is directly tied to the limbic system. And so, we see this in meditative practices. We see rocking back and forth with a baby. I come from a Jewish background, and in Orthodox Jewish prayer, the rocking back and forth, which kind of gets you into a more meditative space. So we know that repetitive movement is something that inherently gets us into a place of comfort and connection. Even a lot of people's favorite activity, sex, it's a repetitive movement, it's a rhythmic movement. And by getting into that with each other, we have this deeper connection where we can get into a groove together, dancing as a group. And, going back to a mosh pit, being part of a crowd that has the same type of energy, that's enjoying the same movement, the same music, the same beat, there is a part of me that comes alive in that and can feel deeper than if I'm just sitting in my seat and bobbing my head along, which doesn't really do it.
I think a large part of it is like so much of Western culture and science has this like, it's set up to be like observer and observed. And so you're always standing apart from what you're observing. And it's not inherently natural. We're inherently part of our environment, right? But there's some, neurologies that are just feel more comfortable being at arm's length from things. But what you're really describing is a practice of like completely integrating with your environment, moving with it, moving through it, moving as it. As a musician who makes, really punky rap where everyone is stage diving and then crowd surfing and people would always be like, I don't see the confluence, how that comes together with meditation. Like, how are you stage diving on the weekend and then guiding meditation during the week? And it's like when, if I'm on stage and I'm the kind of party conductor for this thronging mass of like thousands of people moving, like I cease to be a point over here and you cease to be a point over there. And we're in this big moving mass together that feels fucking awesome. Right.
Yeah,
So it's just
yeah,
this like shedding of the boundary that just makes you feel instantly more human and more joyful, right? And I think what
right.
you're talking about is like we have these internal impulses towards that, and
Yeah.
ADHD might be just an impulse, a stronger impulse towards that, to break that down.
I think what you just said is bang on, that there is a depth dimension to these practices that we do, that we could look at it just through like, this is the thing we need to do to regulate. Like I'm self-regulating. I'm learning how to like shave off some of my suffering, come more into experience. And that's wonderful. And, as meditators, there's a direction to meditation practice. There's different kinds of practices. You could say do different things, but in general, what you're working towards is a way to be in the world where there's less and less suffering in more and more conditions.
Mhm.
Eventually getting to a place where you can ideally be able to be in almost any condition with a certain amount of ease, even challenging ones with a sense of connection. And for that, I feel like you need a practice. You can be subject to life and just do your best to regulate here and there in the moment, but I
Hmm.
think we can do
Hmm.
better. We can actually get more deliberate about certain ways in which we're committing our attention or the ways we're inhabiting our embodiment, and that can begin to make a bigger impact on our suffering. And that is kind of what we're all about here at the Mind Bod Pod. And I wonder how you think about that as a neurodiversity affirming therapist.
How do we cultivate You're asking how do we cultivate practices which put us in this mindset, which make us feel connected. Yeah.
Yeah, how do we build habits of long-term health,
Hmm.
that are
Yeah.
beyond just kind of normative, being a little less the kind of classic Freudian, like the usual miserable neurotic suffering life, but actually towards more
Hmm.
connection and healing and
Well, I think we don't pay attention as a culture to our bodily needs very much. And this comes from a long Western tradition of the Cartesian mind body split type thing, which has just infected our society, and I think is so wrongheaded. This is especially true with ADHDers because we're always, why can't I get motivated to do it? You're not going to get motivated. It's not interesting. You're never going to get motivated to do this thing. But what you can do is say, what does my body need in order for my, attention to shift, in order for me to connect better? What am I not doing? Do I need more stimulation? Do I need a break? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to go and hug a tree and touch the bark? What is happening around me and what are my impulses, that my body needs that I can engage in without, hopefully creating too much harm or any harm. Um, even something as simple as, I love picking up leaves and kind of just peeling the pieces between the veins.
Mm.
Something like that just feels supremely regulating. And when we start paying attention to this stuff, then it's amazing how our minds come online. We start to feel regulated. We start to feel connected to the world around us. And just naturally, we start thinking better.
Joel, did you want to maybe guide us in some kind of practice? Do you have any ideas? We can cut all this out if you don't want to. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. I absolutely can. So, one caveat I want to throw in here is oftentimes when people have been chronically shamed for their natural movement and what their body wants to do, and this ties back into you mentioned ABA, which is a essentially a therapy that conditions autistic people to not be autistic and will punish or not punish, oftentimes just ignore or make them not want to do what naturally comes, and will reinforce doing it in a way that looks more neurotypical. What I often find happens is when you do something like this, there's so much trauma associated with the authentic movement that once you start to look at it, it can actually cause a lot of dysregulation. It can actually have kind of like an opposite effect. So if that happens, I would just say to people that means that there's some trauma work that needs to be done, to do it slowly, to unpack some of the shame, to work on tolerance of shame. That's often something that has to happen. So, because something like this can be very triggering if you have a lot of trauma around the way your body was controlled by others. So, that being said, one of the things that I will just do is kind of a body scan. Get your brain to your feet. Is there anything that you want your foot to do? If not, that's okay too. And sometimes because people aren't even aware of what their options are because they've been so conditioned, it's like, do you want to wiggle your toes? Maybe let's do that together. Let's wiggle our toes. Does that feel, you feeling expanding? Do you feeling a contraction? Are you feeling like, oh, I don't want to do this? What's kind of going on when you just wiggle your toes? And if you can stop it if you want. Okay, now let's go to maybe your legs. Do you want to bounce them? Do you want to put them back and forth? Do you want to spread out wide or do you want to close your legs? Do you want to put your legs crossed? Do you want to put your ankle on top of your knee? What do you want to do? And just allow your body to do that. And now that you're doing that, let's just check into the muscles that you're using. How does that feel? and you're smiling, both of you. So you're getting some good feelings from this. And let's sit with that good feeling just for a little bit. Acknowledge that it's there. We don't have to move away from it. So I think we're often so disconnected from the way that our bodies can make us feel and the pleasure that we can gain from our bodies. So let's sit with that and enjoy it. Be thankful that we're able to derive such pleasure from our bodies. And then we might move to our trunk. Do you want to squeeze in? Do you want to stretch up? Or do you want to just keep it still? Or something in between? I'm finding myself wanting to stretch out my chest and my shoulders, and that feels really good. I'm also finding myself wanting to rub the bottoms of my feet. So I'm going to do that. And I see Jeff is rubbing his hands together.
And I'm making them dance like little birds.
Yes.
I do want to do that. I do.
Yes.
I'm a bouncer and a jiggler.
You are.
Yeah.
Bouncer,
I get guilted out sometimes by my family because I don't want to sit at dinner. I want to stand and walk around and interact and then go and leave the room and read my book for a minute.
Right. And one of the things that I'll often do at this point in the exercise is, because there's often so much shame, I will do it with the person to show that there's nothing shameful about that. We can join in this together. So you want to do your birds? All right, let's do the birds together. Let's all do birds just for a little bit.
Like these little peace doves that want to fly from the end of your arm stumps.
For anyone who's listening and not watching, we're like flapping our hands like they're bird wings.
You're missing something deeply beautiful, a visual beauty.
And I'll ask you, Jeff, how does it feel to have us doing this along with you?
It feels good.
You have a big smile and your face is turning red, and that's just the joy is coming out.
I actually sometimes guide a version of this when I'm at a big retreat. I get everybody to stand up and move their bodies how they want, and I'll just do the most outrageous belly dancing in the middle, and I feel wonderful when people follow me.
Yeah, and Tasha, you're flushing a little bit too, and Tasha just upped the energy. So we're gonna up the energy to match Tasha's energy because that feels good too.
Can you channel your former existence as a crowd surfing hip hop artist?
Oh, that looks bigger. I can't do that sitting down. The whole body wave.
Yeah.
You're allowed? I'm allowed to do this with my body, you mean?
Yeah. And maybe we go to our voices now. Yeah, what does our voice want to do? Do we want to say anything silly or do anything different?
You never have to ask the two of us to go into a vocal weirdness.
Go when to run. Label. I've been one day.
It just happened.
Came from this.
And what ended up happening by embodying our needs and by doing this together and consciously joining together, we spontaneously connected in this very deep way and broke into song.
Yeah.
And this is like the wisdom of like indigenous cultures too, because this is like part and parcel to how, connection among people is maintained, is through these kind of ritualistic practices of mirroring each other and songs and dancing, and getting our bodies involved is such an essential part of connection to ourselves and others.
And talk about an act of decolonization.
Yeah,
we're so fucking uptight in our culture. It's like there's a word in French, coincé, which literally means up the ass.
Thank you, old dead white guys.
Yeah, thanks for that.
You said something that I resonate with so deeply, which was like, experiencing your own body joyfully. And this is something I've been experimenting with so much over the last couple of years, which is that like fiddling, because whether you're neurodivergent or not, probably at some point in your life you fidgeted and somebody has told you to stop, right? Like a teacher or a parent was like, just quit bouncing or quit ripping up pieces of paper. And so like, I find for decades, even just like the act of fiddling, I would internalize that as like, oh, I must be anxious. I would like read my own body as, oh, I guess I'm not okay. But then just to pour your attention into the felt sense of it, like for me, I'll do this thing where, okay, if I'm fidgeting, I'll stop, not because I think it's bad, but because I want to feel what it feels like, what is giving rise to that movement. So like, let's say it's my hands, and then so I'll stop fidgeting my hands and feel into it. And there's this like aliveness, like it's like tingling. It's like it wants to move, and then you give into it. It's the expression of the joy of that sensation. It's like the aliveness of your hands wants to move, and in moving it generates even more joy, right? So like to me, this has been mind-blowing in the last, like, I don't know, 5-6 years, where I'm just like, oh, there's a tingling in my leg. What shall I do with it?
Yes.
Friends, this is dangerous territory we're going down. What are we talking about? What kind of anarchic vision of society is it, where everyone's walking down the street smiling
and stimulating
and moving their
sensualized
hands and doing sexualized, safely sexualized.
All of the teenagers will be pregnant within months if we allow this to continue.
So one of the things I love about Nick Walker's work is her idea of neurocosmopolitanism, which is kind of like we're pointing to here. It's sort of like, well, what would the world look like if we were to truly embrace neurodiversity and the true multiplicity of embodiedness and identity? What would it look like? And I'm curious for your take on that, Joel. Like, what might it look like? I mean, if you want to get utopian for a moment. It would be more fun, for one. Let's say that.
Yes, it would.
No one would get anything done. No, they would, because we get the autistic people to do all the work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the first thing would be that there would be attention paid to levels of stimulation. There would be plenty of places to duck in and have stimulation breaks. I think that, in classrooms, there would be a lot more attention being paid to stimulation needs. We'd be probably outside a lot more. Just I can do another hour on how the artificiality of sitting down and learning is horrible, not only for neurodivergent people, but for people in general. But we have this system of classrooms which is just thoroughly anti-humanistic as far as I'm concerned. So I think that there would be a conscious attention being paid to people's sensory needs throughout society.
And I guess it would be there'd be a kind of embodied liberalism, we want to call it, like more patience, more empathy for different kinds of physical expressions, where it wouldn't be so, God, I mean, we're living in Toronto with Tasha and I. Toronto can be a very uptight place, even compared to, say, like a New York or an LA or somewhere. Not always, but it can have that feeling sometimes. But I can imagine an opposite, where there's much more sense of permission for different ways we can be and express ourselves, and not having such a strict feeling of, I don't know, like opprobrium that's around how we are.
Nick Walker has her golden rule of neurodiversity, which is, I'm not going to get it perfect, but it's something to the effect of like, respect the bodily, sensory, and cognitive needs of others as you would want your own respected. And then this is the most important part, is whether or not you understand the reason for it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. You don't understand me in order to make this like accommodating for me or kind to me.
And that just to say, and the enormous value of that, because I really feel like, the world's challenges need neurodiversity. They need the kind of creativity that emerges from different kinds of nervous systems to converge on looking how to problem solve those things. And that's and if you think about it, the percentage of activists who are neurodivergent, the percentage of creatives who are neurodivergent, like it's the bipolar ADHD autistic brain that is coming up with so many of the out of the box solutions that we need.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
We solved it.
Rock and roll, dude.
We solved it.
We did it.
Okay, Joel, before we let you go, can you let our listeners know, how can they, interact with your work?
Mm-hmm.
Where can they find you?
So I am in a place now where I'm not doing too much work outside of the practice. I'll probably be changing that. I'm thinking about, you said a book. I think that I have a book in me at some point. I am writing a chapter for an anthology that Nick Walker is editing. But and I'm always happy to consult with people and talk to them. The company that I co-run with my spouse is called Total Spectrum Counseling. We do, therapy and for individuals, families, couples out of, California, though we're licensed in a couple other states. But we can do consultations with people from anywhere in the world. And often people will come to us from other countries whose, the licensing requirements might be, you just need to tell them that you're doing an assessment. They'll say, am I autistic? Am I ADHD? And we'll do kind of an assessment for them. We've worked with a couple of people in Canada. Some of the provinces are pretty lax about what they're allowed to do. Other ones are, not. So, it's dependent on that. But yeah, totalspectrumcounseling.com is our company. Probably in the next year or two, I'll probably reemerge and do some more public advocacy stuff. But at the moment, it's not. Oh, I do have there's a Chicago School of Professional Psychology. I have a couple of trainings for practitioners on ADHD and autism. Oftentimes, because I really get into this lived experience of it, I will have people who have an autistic person or an ADHD person in their life. They'll watch it to try to get a deeper understanding of what's going on, how to support and love the person.
I love that. And then it's something else you say that's so helpful is, if you're neurodivergent or you feel like you relate to some of this and you're having challenges, look for neurodiversity affirming therapists. Like, you used to have a lot of people through your Facebook page that were other therapists who kind of came. But is there a way did people just Google that in their area? What would you recommend?
Yeah, there are a few directories from like the Neurodiversity Therapy Collective. Yeah, if you just Google neurodiversity affirmative therapist, you'll probably find a couple of directories. You'll probably find people talking about it on their websites. It's still, even though there's getting a lot more mainstream, it's still, that's really a minority area. So you're not going to see a ton of people who are doing this work. Also, as our culture loves to do through a colonial lens, they love to kind of usurp good ideas and try to, push it through on their own. So there are a lot of people out there who are claiming to be neurodiversity affirming who really aren't. So, you want to ask them questions about, what does that mean to you? What is your direct experience and lived experience with being neurodivergent? What are your thoughts about masking and unmasking? Asking questions like that to see if you're aligned with your practitioner.
Yeah, this is
so
great
helpful.
advice. Yeah.
Joel, thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for that amazing practice, for putting up with all my enthusiasm and Tasha's intelligent questions.
Oh, yeah. He's sitting here being a autistic weirdo, asking my autistic weirdo questions.
I love autistic weirdo questions. They're the best questions there are.
Well,
thank you so
Fred,
much.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
And now, join us for the after party at mindbodpod.com, where me and Jeff talk candidly about whatever didn't get said in this week's episode, and chat in the comments with the whole MindBod squad. Don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week, and if you want to support our crazy adventures, consider becoming a paid subscriber on Substack at mindbodpod.com. See you there.